Greetings, warriors and dreamers. Welcome to the realms of sleep, where tonight we journey through the epic world of God of War. I am your guide through the 9 realms, where ancient gods whisper their secrets and mythic landscapes unfold before us. From the frost-covered mountains of Midgard to the golden halls of Asgard, these tales of gods and giants will carry you into peaceful slumber. Lay down your weapons, rest your weary head, and allow the legends of these powerful beings to become the landscape of your dreams. The battles have been fought, and now is the time for rest. So close your eyes, brave one. Let the fire of the hearth warm you as we begin our journey through realms both wondrous and dangerous. The first pale light of dawn had barely touched the eastern horizon when Kratos and Atreus arrived at the familiar clearing, their breath forming small clouds in the crisp morning air. Before them stood the ancient oak, its massive trunk carved hollow by centuries of wind and weather, creating a natural shelter that had welcomed travelers for generations beyond counting. "I remember this place," Atreus said softly, his voice carrying a mixture of wonder and melancholy as he approached the tree's weathered bark. His fingers traced the deep grooves where time had carved its patient signature, finding handholds worn smooth by countless hands that had sought the same shelter they now claimed. Atreus nodded, his own memories stirring as he surveyed the hollow's interior. The space within could comfortably accommodate a small family, its curved walls rising to a natural ceiling that had protected them from rain and snow during a particularly harsh winter 3 years past. Faye had been with them then, her laughter echoing softly within these wooden walls as she taught Atreus to identify different bird calls by their distinctive songs. "Your mother chose this place for our winter camp," he said, setting down his pack with careful deliberation. "She said the tree called to her, that it remembered other families who had found safety here." He paused, studying the blackened stones that marked where their previous fires had burned. She was rarely wrong about such things. The hollow showed signs of recent use by other travelers. Carefully stacked firewood, stones arranged for optimal heat distribution, even a small shelf carved into the living wood where provisions could be stored safely above ground level. Such courtesy among woodsmen created an unspoken community, each group leaving improvements for those who would follow, maintaining the shelter through collective care rather than individual ownership. Atreus explored the familiar space with renewed appreciation, noticing details that had escaped his younger self's attention during their previous stay. Symbols carved into the wood by various occupants told stories of survival and gratitude, initials intertwined with simple pictures of animals, children's handprints preserved in the softer outer bark, even a few lines of poetry scratched carefully into a smooth section near the entrance. "Look, father," he called, pointing to a section of wall where new markings had appeared since their last visit. "Someone has been maintaining Mother's garden markers." Beyond the hollow's opening, barely visible in the dim morning light, the faint outlines of Faye's careful plantings were still evident. Medicinal herbs and hardy vegetables that would provide sustenance for anyone who understood their value. Rarot joined his son at the entrance, studying the neat rows where someone had clearly tended the abandoned garden through recent seasons. Weeds had been cleared, soil carefully turned, and several plants showed signs of deliberate pruning. The work demonstrated respect for Faye's intent, rather than mere appropriation of her labor. "She would appreciate this," he observed, a note of approval in his typically measured tone. The garden was always meant to serve others, not just our family. He began gathering the prepared firewood, noting with satisfaction that it had been properly seasoned and sorted by size. the work of someone who understood the importance of efficient fires during cold weather. As Kratos arranged the kindling with methodical precision, Atreus unpacked their simple provisions, setting aside items that could be prepared over the coming fire while reserving others for later in their journey. Their supplies remained adequate for several more days of travel, though the abundance of the hollow's location would allow them to supplement with fresh water from the nearby stream and perhaps wild berries if the season proved favorable. The stream still runs clear, Atreus reported after a brief exploration of the surrounding area. And there are fresh deer tracks leading to the water. We're not the only ones who remember this as a safe place. He returned carrying a leather pouch filled with clean water, his movements efficient despite the early hour and the weight of recent emotional experiences. Kratos had succeeded in coaxing flame from carefully arranged tinder, using the old techniques his father had taught him in Sparta, decades before any of his more dramatic adventures began. The simple pleasure of creating fire through patience and skill, rather than magical compulsion, offered a grounding connection to fundamental human capabilities that transcended divine intervention or supernatural assistance. "Fire is honest," he said, as the small flames caught and began to spread through the prepared wood. "It requires attention and proper materials, but it asks nothing more complex than care and understanding." He adjusted a piece of kindling to improve airflow, noting how the flames responded immediately to this minor correction. Many problems could be solved with such straightforward principles. The growing fire cast dancing shadows against the hollow's curved walls, transforming the carved symbols into seemingly animated stories that shifted and changed with each flicker of the flames. What had appeared as simple scratches in daylight became elaborate narratives in the interplay of light and shadow. Travelers' tales preserved in wood and revealed through firelight, awaiting patient observers who understood their subtle language. Atreus settled comfortably beside the fire, removing his pack and arranging his gear with the practiced efficiency of seasoned travel. From a carefully wrapped bundle, he withdrew a piece of pale wood roughly the size of his palm, its surface partially carved with intricate patterns that showed hours of patient work during quiet moments of their ongoing journey. "I've been working on something," he said, holding the carving so the firelight illuminated its developing details. "A way to remember everything we've learned. Everything we've seen." The wood revealed itself as birch, chosen for its fine grain and pale color that would accept detailed work without splitting unpredictably under the carver's knife. Kratos examined the piece with genuine interest, noting the careful attention to proportion and the steady progress of the design despite the challenging conditions under which such work had to be accomplished. "You show considerable skill," he observed, recognizing the hours of concentrated effort represented in each precisely cut line. "This quality of work requires both patience and dedication." The carving depicted a stylized tree surrounded by various smaller symbols, some clearly recognizable as landmarks from their journey, others more abstract representations of experiences or emotions that defied simple pictorial representation. Near the tree's base, two figures stood together, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other smaller but clearly defined as archer rather than mere child. "Each symbol represents something important," Atreus explained, tracing specific elements with careful fingers. "This spiral here is for the mountain where we spread Mother's ashes. The wolf track represents Fenrir and everything we learned about choosing our own paths, rather than accepting what others expect." He pointed to a small boat carved near the tree's roots. "And this is for our journey across the lake, when you first started teaching me to really see the world instead of just looking at it." The level of symbolism embedded in such a small piece surprised Kratos, though he recognized the logical extension of his son's natural inclination toward meaning-making and pattern recognition. Throughout their journey, Atreus had demonstrated remarkable ability to synthesize experiences into understanding, to find connections between seemingly disparate events and lessons. "And this section?" Kratos asked, indicating an area where the carving remained unfinished, rough wood awaiting the careful attention that would transform it into deliberate design. "That's for what comes next," Atreus replied with quiet confidence. "I don't know what we'll find or what we'll learn, but I want to be ready to add it when the time comes." He rewrapped the carving carefully, protecting it from moisture and accidental damage, while keeping it easily accessible for continued work during future rest stops. The fire had settled into steady burning, providing consistent warmth and light that transformed the hollow into a comfortable refuge from the cold morning air. Outside their shelter, the forest gradually awakened to the new day, birds beginning their territorial songs, small animals moving cautiously through undergrowth, the subtle sounds of a wilderness ecosystem beginning its daily cycle of survival and cooperation. "Your mother carved too," Kratos said unexpectedly, his voice carrying uncharacteristic warmth as he stared into the dancing flames. Not symbols or pictures, but practical things. Spoons, bowls, handles for tools that needed replacement. He paused, allowing the memory to surface fully before continuing. "She said that working with wood taught patience, because it could not be rushed, only guided." This revelation caught Atreus' attention completely, as references to his mother's specific activities remained relatively rare in his father's typical conversation. "Did she teach you anything about carving?" he asked, hoping to encourage further sharing of these precious memories that seemed to emerge only during moments of particular peace or reflection. "She tried," Kratos admitted with what might have been the faintest suggestion of a smile. "My hands were trained for weapons, not careful work, but she was persistent, saying that creation required different skills than destruction, and that both had their place in a complete life." He studied his own scarred hands in the firelight. "I proved a poor student for such delicate lessons. Maybe you could try again," Atreus suggested gently, recognizing an opportunity to share something meaningful with his father while honoring his mother's memory simultaneously. "I could teach you what I've learned. We have time, and the fire provides good light for seeing the work clearly." Gratius considered this proposal with characteristic thoroughness, weighing practical benefits against potential frustrations. His hands, so skilled with axe and blade, had always struggled with tasks requiring fine motor control and artistic sensitivity. Yet the idea of learning something Fae had valued, guided by the son who carried so much of her wisdom, held appeal beyond mere skill acquisition. "What would you suggest for a first project?" he asked, recognizing that his son's patient instruction might succeed where Faes had encountered too much resistance from old habits and expectations. Atreus brightened considerably at this acceptance, immediately beginning to consider appropriate challenges for a beginner whose physical capabilities far exceeded his artistic experience. "Something simple but meaningful, maybe a small bowl or cup that we could actually use during our travels." He gestured toward their current provisions. Practical items make good practice because they don't need to be beautiful to be successful. This practical approach appealed to Kratos' fundamental nature, offering clear criteria for success while avoiding the subjective judgments that made artistic endeavors feel uncertain or arbitrary. A cup either held water effectively or it did not. Simple assessment that eliminated the ambiguity he found uncomfortable in purely aesthetic pursuits. From his pack, Atreus retrieved a piece of maple wood he had selected during their previous day's travel, chosen specifically for its workable size and relatively soft grain that would forgive beginner mistakes while still accepting detailed work when skill developed sufficiently. Along with the wood, he produced a small but sharp knife designed for carving rather than combat, its blade shaped specifically for the controlled cuts that transformed raw material into finished object. The first step is understanding the wood itself, Atreus began, his instruction unconsciously echoing techniques Faye had used when teaching him the same fundamental principles. Each piece has its own character, places where it wants to split, directions where it cuts easily, hidden knots that might create problems if you don't work with them properly. Kratos accepted the wooden knife with careful attention, noting how different the carving blade felt compared to weapons he wielded instinctively. The balance point lay much closer to the cutting edge, requiring entirely different hand positioning and pressure application. Where combat blades delivered force through leverage and momentum, carving tools achieved their purpose through precision and control. "Show me how to hold them correctly," he requested, recognizing that proper fundamentals would prevent the development of counterproductive habits that would require correction later. Throughout his long existence, he had learned that mastering basics thoroughly proved more efficient than attempting advanced techniques before foundation skills had been properly established. Atreus guided his father's hand positioning with gentle corrections, demonstrating proper grip angles, and explaining how different holds served different types of cuts. "The knife should feel like an extension of your finger," he said, repeating one of Faye's favorite analogies. "You're not forcing it through the wood. You're encouraging it to follow the path you've chosen." The initial attempts proved clumsy, as expected, with Kratos' instinctive application of force creating rough gouges rather than smooth, controlled cuts. Yet he persisted with characteristic determination, gradually adjusting pressure and angle based on the wood's response and his son's patient guidance. Slowly, deliberate shavings began to fall away instead of jagged chunks, indicating progress toward proper technique. "Better?" Atreus encouraged as his father's movements became more controlled. "Wood responds to confidence combined with restraint. You need to commit to each cut but not overpower it." He demonstrated on his own piece, showing how steady pressure combined with proper angle created clean lines that required minimal additional smoothing. The work progressed slowly, with frequent pauses for instruction and correction, but also with growing satisfaction as basic techniques gradually became more natural. Kratos found unexpected pleasure in the way careful attention to immediate tasks created a meditative state that quieted the constant tactical awareness that typically occupied his mind during waking hours. "I understand now why your mother valued this activity," he said after successfully completing a series of cuts that removed a significant section of excess wood without creating unwanted splits or rough edges. "It requires complete attention to the present moment while working toward long-term goals, principles that apply to many aspects of life beyond carving." The fire continued its steady burning, occasionally requiring attention to maintain optimal heat and light, but otherwise providing reliable warmth and illumination for their shared activity. Outside the hollow, full daylight had arrived, though the thick canopy of surrounding trees maintained the intimate atmosphere of firelight that made their enclosed space feel separate from the broader world. As morning progressed toward midday, both father and son became increasingly absorbed in their respective projects. Atreus continued refining details on his symbolic carving, adding elements that represented recent experiences while maintaining overall design coherence. Kratos persevered with his cup, gradually shaping the wood into something that might actually serve its intended function despite obvious signs of beginner status. "The imperfections give it character," Atreus observed when his father expressed frustration with uneven surfaces and asymmetrical proportions. Besides, you'll appreciate it more because you made it yourself. Mother always said that objects created with our own hands carry part of our spirit with them. That's why they last longer and work better than things acquired through other means. This perspective aligned with various philosophical principles Kratos had encountered throughout his extensive travels. Though he had rarely applied such concepts to personal creative endeavors, the idea that investing attention and effort into an object, imbued it with qualities beyond mere material properties, offered explanation for his growing attachment to the crude cup taking shape under his inexpert hands. "Does this mean your carving carries your spirit as well?" he asked, gesturing toward the intricate piece that represented hours of careful work over many days of their journey. "I hope so," Atreus replied thoughtfully. "That's why I want to keep adding to it as we continue traveling. Each new symbol or detail becomes part of the whole, but also part of me, a way of carrying our experiences forward, even when memory might fade or change." He held up the carving to catch the firelight. "Someday, I could share these stories with my own children, if I have any. They could understand something about their grandfather and the journey we took together." The reference to potential future generations caught Kratos unexpectedly, highlighting aspects of continuity and legacy that he rarely considered beyond immediate survival concerns. Yet the image of his son sharing carved stories with hypothetical children created surprising warmth, evidence that their current struggles might contribute to something enduring beyond their own lifetimes. A soft sound outside the hollow drew their attention momentarily from their carving projects. Through the entrance, they glimpsed a red fox picking its way carefully through the underbrush, pausing occasionally to test the air for signs of danger or opportunity. The animal showed no fear of their presence, suggesting this area maintained its reputation as neutral ground where various forest inhabitants could coexist peacefully. "Mother always said the animals knew which places were safe," Atreus observed, watching the fox continue its unhurried exploration of their clearing. "Demons can sense things we miss, whether a location has good energy or carries some kind of threat or sorrow." The fox paused to look directly at them for a moment before continuing on its way, apparently satisfied that they posed no immediate danger to its interests. "Your mother possessed similar sensitivity," Kratos acknowledged. "She could read landscapes and understand their histories in ways that took me years to begin to appreciate." He returned to his carving, but with less focused concentration. His awareness now extended to encompass the peaceful atmosphere that surrounded their temporary shelter. The rhythm of their work created comfortable silence, broken only by the soft sounds of knives moving through wood, the occasional crackle of the fire, and distant forest sounds that provided natural soundtrack to their shared activity. Neither felt compelled to fill the quiet with conversation, each absorbed in immediate tasks, while simultaneously aware of the other's presence and contentment. As the cup gradually took recognizable shape under Kratos' persistent efforts, Atreus completed another small section of his symbolic carving, adding a delicate representation of the aurora they had witnessed during their recent journey to the northern plateau. The flowing lines required careful attention to achieve the sense of movement and ethereal beauty that characterized the natural phenomenon he was attempting to capture in static form. "That's the most complex section yet," Kratos observed, noting the intricate detail work required to create the impression of shifting light within the constraints of carved wood. "How do you plan such elaborate designs before beginning the actual cutting?" "I don't, entirely," Atreus admitted. "I start with a general idea, but the details develop as I work. Sometimes the wood suggests things I hadn't considered, or I discover connections between different elements that weren't obvious at first." He demonstrated by indicating how the aurora design flowed naturally into the tree's branches, creating visual unity that enhanced both elements. This organic approach to design intrigued Kratos, whose tactical mind typically preferred detailed planning before action. Yet he could see merit in allowing projects to evolve through the interaction of intention and circumstance, particularly when the process itself held value independent of predetermined outcomes. Perhaps I should allow my cup to suggest its own final form, he mused, studying the rough shape that had emerged from his efforts. While clearly recognizable as a drinking vessel, it bore little resemblance to any conventional cup he had encountered. Yet its unusual proportions and irregular surfaces seemed somehow appropriate for its origins and intended purpose. Exactly, Atreus encouraged. Let it become what it wants to be, guided by your hands and intentions, but not constrained by expectations about what a cup should look like. He paused in his own work to examine his father's progress. It's starting to look like something you would use. Practical but distinctive. Mother would have appreciated that combination. The mention of Faye brought both of them into momentary contemplation of her absence, the quiet ache that had softened over time but never entirely disappeared. Yet here in the hollow where she had shared their shelter, surrounded by evidence of her continuing influence on their lives and choices, her memory felt more like presence than loss. She would have enjoyed watching us work together like this, Kratos said quietly, teaching and learning, creating something useful while preserving important experiences. He held up his partly finished cup, examining it with critical but not harsh assessment. She always said that the best education happened when people shared skills willingly, rather than because they had to. Is that why you're teaching me combat technique? Atreus asked. Because you want to share those skills, or because I need them for survival? Kratos considered this question carefully, recognizing its significance beyond casual conversation. Both, he answered finally. The skills themselves are necessary for the world we inhabit, but the way we practice them together, that serves other purposes. Building trust, understanding each other's capabilities, creating memories that will last beyond immediate necessity. This acknowledgement of deeper purpose within their combat training pleased Atreus considerably, confirming his sense that their relationship extended far beyond mere practical instruction. Like the carving work they shared now, their weapons practice served multiple functions simultaneously: skill development, emotional connection, and preparation for unknown future challenges. The fire had burned down to comfortable coals that provided steady heat without the dramatic flames of earlier burning. Kratos added a few pieces of prepared wood to maintain warmth and light, noting with satisfaction how the well-seasoned material caught immediately, without producing excessive smoke that might attract unwanted attention to their location. We could stay here another day, Atreus suggested, clearly reluctant to abandon the peaceful atmosphere they had created within the hollow's sheltering walls. Continue working on our projects, maybe explore the area more thoroughly. Mother's garden could probably use some additional tending, and I'd like to see if any of her medicinal plants are ready for harvesting. The practical benefits of this proposal appealed to Kratos. Opportunity to rest thoroughly, replenish supplies, and complete useful projects without the pressures of constant travel. Yet he also recognized his son's deeper desire to extend their connection to this place and its memories, to honor Faye's presence while strengthening their own bond through shared creative endeavor. We have no pressing schedule, he agreed. Another day here could prove beneficial for several reasons. He resumed his carving with renewed focus, determined to complete the cup within the additional time their extended stay would provide. The prospect of finishing something begun in this meaningful location added motivation to his efforts. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen outside their shelter, both father and son settled more completely into the rhythm of sustained creative work. Conversation became less frequent as concentration deepened, each absorbed in the challenges and satisfactions of transforming raw materials into finished objects through patient application of developing skills. The forest around them maintained its peaceful character throughout the day, with various animals making brief appearances at the clearing's edges, a family of rabbits investigating the abandoned garden, several songbirds examining the hollow's entrance before deciding the space was already occupied, and the return of the red fox, which seemed to have adopted their area as part of its regular territory. "We're being accepted," Atreus observed during one of their brief conversation breaks. "The animals are treating us like we belong here, rather than as temporary intruders." He gestured toward the fox, which had settled in a sunny spot barely 20 feet from their entrance, apparently confident enough in their harmless intentions to rest within easy sight of their shelter. "Your mother would say we're remembering how to be part of the forest instead of just passing through it," Kratos replied, surprising himself with the easy way such philosophy emerged from his typically more practical mindset. The combination of peaceful environment, creative activity, and emotional connection seemed to unlock perspectives he rarely accessed during more stressful circumstances. As evening approached, they prepared a simple meal, using provisions supplemented with fresh herbs from Faye's carefully maintained garden and clean water from the nearby stream. The food tasted better than usual, enhanced by the satisfaction of their creative work and the comfortable atmosphere they had established within their temporary home. "Tomorrow we can finish our projects," Atreus said with contentment as they settled beside the renewed fire after their meal. "Your cup should be ready for its first real test, and I want to add one more symbol to represent this place and what we've shared here." Kratos nodded agreement, cradling the rough wooden cup in his large hands and marveling at how something so simple could carry such significance. Through patient work and his son's generous instruction, he had created something functional and personal, a tangible reminder of growth and learning that extended far beyond mere craftsmanship. Outside their hollow, night settled gradually over the forest, bringing with it the gentle sounds of nocturnal creatures beginning their evening activities. Yet within their firelit shelter, surrounded by the evidence of productive work and meaningful connection, both father and son felt the deep satisfaction that comes from time well spent in the company of someone whose presence enriches rather than demands. The hollow tree continued its ancient vigil, protecting another generation of travelers, while they found rest and restoration within its generous embrace. Tomorrow would bring completion of their projects and eventual return to their larger journey, but tonight offered perfect peace, the kind that comes not from the absence of challenges, but from the presence of understanding, shared purpose, and quiet love that needed no words for complete expression. In the dancing firelight, two figures worked quietly side by side, creating lasting objects from temporary materials, while building permanent memories from fleeting moments. The tree that sheltered them had stood for centuries, witnessing countless such scenes of human connection and creativity, serving as silent testament to the enduring power of simple acts performed with attention and care. As the night deepened around their peaceful sanctuary, Atreus set aside his carving to examine his father's progress more closely. The cup had evolved considerably from its rough beginnings, taking on a character that reflected both Kratos' persistent effort and the natural properties of the wood he had chosen to work with. Though unmistakably the product of inexperienced hands, it possessed an honest functionality that spoke to its creator's practical nature. "May I?" Atreus asked, gesturing toward the nearly completed vessel. When his father nodded permission, he lifted the cup carefully, testing its weight and balance, while examining the surface with appreciation for the hours of patient work it represented. "It feels solid," he observed, "like it was made to last through real use, rather than just sitting on a shelf somewhere." Kratos accepted this assessment with quiet satisfaction, recognizing truth in his son's observation. Throughout the day's work, he had instinctively prioritized durability over aesthetic perfection, creating something that could withstand the practical demands of their traveling lifestyle. The cup bore evidence of this philosophy: thick walls that would resist cracking, a broad base for stability, and carefully smoothed edges that would be comfortable for daily use. "Your mother would have approved of the practical approach," he said, accepting the cup back and running his thumb along its rim to check for rough spots that might require additional attention. "She always said that objects should serve their purpose first, with beauty emerging from honest function rather than mere decoration." This philosophy had guided many of Faye's choices throughout their time together, from the simple furnishings in their cabin to the practical clothing she created for their family's needs. Yet even her most utilitarian creations had possessed subtle elegance born of careful proportions and attention to materials, qualities that Kratos now recognized in his own rough handiwork, despite its obvious beginner status. "I want to add something to mine as well," Atreus said, returning to his symbolic carving with renewed purpose. "A representation of tonight, of learning together and honoring Mother's memory through creation instead of just remembrance." He studied the available space on his piece, considering how best to incorporate this new element into the existing design. The addition he envisioned would require delicate work, as the remaining uncarved areas were relatively small and already integrated into the overall composition. Yet he felt confident in his ability to create something meaningful without overwhelming the existing elements or disrupting the visual harmony he had worked to achieve throughout the project's development. "What form will this representation take?" Kratos asked, genuinely curious about his son's creative process and the symbolic language he had developed to capture complex experiences in simple carved images. "Two hands working together," Atreus replied after a moment's consideration. "Yours guiding the knife, mine offering guidance in return. It represents how we learn from each other, even when one person is officially the teacher." He began sketching the basic outlines with light cuts, establishing proportions before committing to deeper carving that would be difficult to correct if mistakes occurred. This concept appealed to Kratos, both for its artistic merit and its recognition of mutual learning within their relationship. Though he had initially approached the carving lesson as student receiving instruction from teacher, the experience had indeed involved reciprocal exchange. His questions challenging Atreus to articulate techniques he had internalized, his different perspective offering insights that enhanced his son's own understanding of the craft. The fire had settled into the steady rhythm of established burning, coals glowing with consistent heat that required only occasional attention to maintain optimal temperature. This predictable warmth allowed them to focus entirely on their work, without frequent interruptions for fire management, creating ideal conditions for the sustained concentration that detailed carving demanded. Outside their hollow, the forest had fully embraced its nocturnal character, with night sounds replacing the daytime activities they had observed throughout their extended stay. An owl called from somewhere in the canopy above, its distinctive voice adding to the peaceful atmosphere rather than suggesting any sense of threat or unease. Even the wind had calmed to gentle stirring that barely disturbed the flames within their shelter. "Do you ever wonder what will happen to the things we make?" Atreus asked, as he worked on the intricate hand details of his new addition. "Whether they'll survive long enough for other people to find them someday? Maybe wonder about the stories behind them?" Kratos considered this question while making final adjustments to his cup's interior, smoothing surfaces that would contact water or other liquids during regular use. Objects carry their creator's intentions forward through time, he said thoughtfully. Even when the specific stories are lost, something of the care invested in their creation remains accessible to those who handle them with attention. This perspective aligned with various philosophical traditions he had encountered throughout his extensive travels. Though he rarely articulated such concepts aloud, the combination of peaceful environment and meaningful activity seemed to unlock deeper reflection than typically characterized his everyday conversation, revealing aspects of his thinking that usually remained private. That's why I want to include so many different experiences in this carving, Atreus explained, pausing to examine his progress on the hand representation. Someone who finds it years from now might not understand every specific symbol, but they could sense that it represents a journey shared between people who cared about each other and wanted to remember important moments. The layered meaning embedded in his son's project impressed Kratos with its sophistication, particularly considering Atreus' relatively young age and limited formal education in artistic principles. Yet, this complexity emerged naturally from genuine emotion and careful observation rather than academic instruction, creating authenticity that purely technical training might not have achieved. The best stories survive because they speak to experiences common across time and culture, he observed, drawing on wisdom accumulated through centuries of witnessing human nature in various forms. Love, loss, growth, discovery. These themes resonate regardless of specific circumstances or historical period. As midnight approached, both father and son entered the final stages of their respective projects. Kratos applied careful finishing touches to his cup, removing the last rough spots and ensuring smooth functionality for its intended purpose. Atreus completed the delicate hand details that would represent their shared creative evening, integrating the new element seamlessly into his existing design. "Mine is finished," Atreus announced with quiet satisfaction, holding his carving up to catch the firelight from multiple angles. The completed piece revealed itself as remarkably sophisticated work, with symbolic elements flowing together in harmonious composition that enhanced individual meanings through collective unity. Each symbol remained distinct, yet contributed to larger narrative that spoke of journey, growth, and connection. Kratos studied his son's achievement with genuine admiration, recognizing artistic skill that far exceeded what might be expected from someone of Atreus' age and experience. Yet, beyond technical competence, the carving radiated emotional authenticity that transformed mere craft into meaningful art. Evidence of deep feeling expressed through patient skill and careful attention. "It is excellent work," he said simply, knowing that understated praise often carried more weight than elaborate compliments. "Your mother would have been proud of both the skill and the sentiment it represents." These words brought visible pleasure to Atreus, who treasured any indication that his efforts might have earned maternal approval. Though Faye's physical presence remained only memory, her influence continued, shaping both their individual development and their relationship with each other, creating ongoing connection that transcended ordinary limitations of death. "And yours is ready for practical testing," Atreus replied, examining his father's completed cup with appreciation for its honest functionality. "Would you like to be the first to drink from it? There's still water warming by the fire from earlier." Kratos accepted this suggestion, carefully lifting the small pot where water had been heating slowly throughout their evening's work. Steam rose gently from the surface, indicating ideal temperature for comfortable drinking without risk of burning. He poured a modest amount into his newly completed cup, noting with satisfaction how the liquid settled evenly without revealing any hidden leaks or structural weaknesses. The first sip proved successful. The water tasted clean and fresh, unaffected by any residual wood flavors or rough surfaces that might have compromised the drinking experience. Though the cup's irregular shape felt unfamiliar compared to conventional vessels, it served its intended function effectively while providing tactile reminder of the effort invested in its creation. "It works perfectly," he reported, offering the cup to Atreus for his own evaluation of the finished product. Strange how something so simple can provide such satisfaction when created through personal effort, rather than acquired through other means. Atreus accepted the cup gratefully, tasting the warm water while appreciating both its practical success and its symbolic significance as evidence of his father's willingness to learn new skills, despite natural preference for familiar activities. The vessel represented more than functional object. It embodied openness to growth and change that had characterized their entire relationship development. "We should pack these carefully for tomorrow's departure," he suggested, already considering how best to protect their finished projects during resumed travel. "I want to make sure they survive whatever challenges we encounter on the rest of our journey." This practical concern reminded them both that their peaceful interlude would soon end, replaced by the uncertainties and demands of continued exploration. Yet the objects they had created would accompany them forward, serving as tangible reminders of this shared experience, while providing ongoing utility in their practical daily needs. As they prepared for sleep, arranging their bedrolls within the hollow's protective embrace, both father and son felt the deep satisfaction that comes from time well spent in meaningful activity. The fire had burned down to gentle coals that would provide warmth throughout the night while requiring minimal attention, allowing them to rest peacefully within their ancient shelter. "Thank you for teaching me about carving," Kratos said quietly as they settled into their sleeping arrangements, "and for sharing your project's meaning with me. Such experiences prove that learning continues throughout life, when we remain open to new possibilities. Thank you for being willing to try something different," Atreus replied with equal warmth, "and for letting me share what Mother taught me about working with wood." It felt like having her here with us somehow, guiding both our hands through the work. Outside their hollow, the forest maintained its peaceful vigil, night sounds creating gentle soundtrack to their contentment. The tree that sheltered them had protected countless other travelers through centuries of service, its hollow worn smooth by generations of grateful occupants who had found refuge within its generous embrace. In the soft glow of dying coals, two figures rested quietly side by side, their newly created objects secured safely nearby as tangible evidence of growth, connection, and the enduring power of shared purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and discoveries, but tonight offered perfect peace, the kind that emerges from meaningful work accomplished in the company of someone whose presence enriches rather than demands. Dawn arrived with crystalline clarity, the forest transformed overnight by the season's first true snowfall. Through the hollow's entrance, Kratos and Atreus awakened to a world painted in pristine white, each branch and needle outlined in perfect detail by nature's patient artistry. The snow had fallen silently while they slept, accumulating in gentle drifts that softened the familiar landscape into something altogether more magical. "Look, father," Atreides whispered, his voice filled with wonder as he peered out at the transformed clearing. The fox that had visited them repeatedly during their stay had left delicate tracks across the fresh powder, creating a meandering trail that spoke of cautious exploration rather than purposeful travel. Even their small fire had acquired a crown of snow where flakes had drifted through the hollow's opening, though the coals beneath still glowed with residual warmth. Kratos rose carefully, mindful not to disturb the peaceful atmosphere that seemed to emanate from the snow-muffled forest. The silence felt different from ordinary quiet, deeper and more complete, as if the white blanket had absorbed not just sound but also the restless energy that typically characterized the wilderness around them. "The weather has decided our departure time," he observed, noting how the accumulation continued with steady persistence despite the gentle nature of individual flakes. They packed their belongings with deliberate care, ensuring their newly completed projects received proper protection for the journey ahead. Atreus wrapped his symbolic carving in soft leather, cushioning it against potential impacts while keeping it accessible for future additions as their travels continued. Kratos secured his rough-hewn cup within his pack, positioning it where it would serve practical purposes while remaining safe from damage. "The snow will make traveling more difficult," Atreus noted, as he shouldered his pack, testing its balance with the additional weight of his carving materials and finished project, "but also more beautiful. Mother always said that fresh snow revealed the forest's true character, showing which paths were most traveled, which shelters offered genuine protection, which trees had stories worth learning." As they prepared to leave the hollow that had sheltered their creative endeavors, both father and son paused for a final moment of appreciation. The ancient tree had provided more than mere protection from weather. It had offered space for growth, connection, and the kind of peaceful productivity that honored memory while building new understanding. Their time within its generous embrace would remain among their most treasured, shared experiences. "We should tend the fire before leaving," Kratos suggested, noting the responsibility that came with using established shelters. Future travelers would appreciate finding prepared materials and cleared space, just as they had benefited from previous occupants' considerate maintenance. Such courtesies created invisible community among wilderness wanderers who might never meet, but shared common appreciation for mutual support. Together they arranged the remaining firewood in neat stacks, cleared ash from the fire pit, and organized the stone circle for optimal efficiency. Atreus added fresh tinder to a weather-protected alcove, ensuring the next visitors would find everything necessary for quick fire establishment. These small acts of consideration reflected lessons learned not just from practical experience, but from Faye's teachings about interconnection and responsibility. The snow continued its gentle accumulation as they completed their preparations, transforming their familiar clearing into something that seemed to exist outside ordinary time. Each footstep they took left clear impressions in the unmarked surface, creating temporary record of their presence that would soon be erased by continued precipitation or covered by the tracks of other forest inhabitants. "Ready?" Kratos asked, though he sensed his son's reluctance to abandon this place where they had shared such meaningful time together. The hollow represented more than convenient shelter. It embodied possibility for creation and connection that transcended their typically more challenging circumstances. Atreus nodded, taking one final look at the tree's protective interior before stepping out into the snow-transformed forest. "I'm glad we stayed the extra day," he said quietly. "Some experiences can't be rushed, and this felt like one that needed proper time to develop fully." Their departure from the clearing marked the transition from peaceful interlude back toward active journey, though the snow's presence suggested this next phase would possess its own particular character. The white landscape demanded different awareness and traveling techniques, while offering compensating beauty that would enrich their ongoing adventure in unexpected ways. As they began following the path that would lead them deeper into the snow-covered wilderness, both father and son carried with them more than physical possessions. The hollow tree had given them renewed understanding of creation's value, deeper appreciation for shared learning, and tangible objects that would serve as permanent reminders of growth achieved through patient cooperation and mutual respect. Behind them, the ancient oak stood sentinel in its crown of fresh snow, ready to shelter the next travelers who would discover its generous protection. A fire pit waited for new flames, the carved symbols welcomed future stories, and the peaceful atmosphere remained available for anyone seeking respite from the world's more demanding aspects. Ahead lay unknown territory, made mysterious and inviting by winter's transformative touch, promising new discoveries and challenges that would test both their practical skills and their growing bond as father and son. The snow continued falling with gentle persistence, creating a world that seemed designed specifically for wonder, reflection, and the kind of quiet adventure that builds character through beauty rather than conflict. The first flakes began to fall as they stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the deer disappear into the morning mist. Kratos felt the familiar weight of his son's gaze upon him, not questioning or demanding, but simply observing, learning in the quiet way that had become natural between them over these many months of shared journey. "We should return," Kratos said, his voice carrying the soft finality of a lesson concluded. The words hung in the cold air for a moment before Atreus nodded, understanding without explanation that their vigil had reached its natural end. The deer had offered its teaching through simple presence, and now the forest called them back along paths they had walked in darkness hours before. Atreus adjusted his bow across his shoulder, the familiar motion automatic after countless similar preparations. Yet something felt different this morning, lighter somehow, as if the weight he carried had shifted during their patient observation of the woodland creature. His steps fell naturally into rhythm beside his father's as they began their descent along the winding trail that would eventually lead them home. The snow gathered momentum as they walked, individual flakes growing larger and more numerous until the air around them filled with gentle white motion. Each crystal caught what little light filtered through the forest canopy, creating tiny moments of brilliance that appeared and vanished in endless succession. The effect transformed the familiar woodland into something altogether more magical, as if they moved through a realm where ordinary rules held less dominion. "Look," Atreus said quietly, pointing toward a section of trail ahead where their earlier footprints had been joined by those of smaller creatures. Rabbits, perhaps, or foxes, who had used the path they had broken through deeper snow. The convergence of tracks created intricate patterns in the white surface, evidence of shared passage across the winter landscape. Kratos observed these markings with the practical eye of an experienced tracker, noting the various gaits and directions that told stories of nocturnal wanderings. A family of raccoons had crossed from oak to pine, following some instinct toward shelter or sustenance. Field mice had darted between exposed roots, their tiny prints creating delicate chains of connection across the broader path carved by human passage. "We're all seeking the same basic things," he said after studying the layered tracks for a long moment. "Shelter, safety, the comfort of familiar ground beneath our feet." His words carried weight beyond their surface meaning, acknowledgement of commonalities that transcended species boundaries, universal needs that connected all living beings, regardless of size or strength or cosmic significance. The snow continued its steady accumulation, muffling sound until their footsteps became the primary rhythm, marking their progress. Banches overhead collected white burden in increasing amounts, occasionally releasing small avalanches when the weight exceeded their capacity to hold. These minor snow showers created moments of gentle surprise, dusting shoulders and hair with fresh powder that quickly melted against warm skin. Atreus found himself hypnotized by the falling flakes, each one unique, yet part of the greater whole descending around them. Some spiraled in elaborate dances before settling, while others fell with determined directness toward Earth. The variety within apparent uniformity reminded him of something his mother had once said about people, how individual differences served larger purposes that weren't always immediately apparent. "Father," he said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them like another layer of winter covering. "Do you dream?" The question emerged without conscious planning, prompted by some association his mind had made between the snow's gentle descent and the mysterious processes of sleep that claimed consciousness each night. Kratos considered the inquiry with characteristic deliberation, understanding that his son asked not from idle curiosity, but from genuine desire to understand aspects of existence that remained opaque to young perception. Dreams occupied complex territory between conscious thought and unconscious processing, revealing truths that waking mind often struggled to articulate directly. "I dream," he confirmed, his admission carrying subtle weight. Throughout most of his existence, dreams had served as battleground where past traumas reasserted themselves with relentless persistence. Visions of burning cities, dying family members, and divine manipulations had haunted his sleeping hours for decades, making rest a challenge rather than refuge from daily struggles. "But they have changed," he continued, surprising himself with this voluntary expansion beyond minimal response. Something about the morning's peaceful atmosphere, combined with the gradual lightening of sky above the forest canopy, encouraged more open communication than usually felt appropriate. Once they brought only pain and regret, now, sometimes they bring different things. Atreus walked in thoughtful silence for several steps, processing this unexpected glimpse into his father's inner experience. He had occasionally wondered about Atreus's relationship with sleep and dreams, noting how his father often remained alert well into night hours, as if reluctant to surrender consciousness to whatever might emerge in unguarded moments. "What kind of different things?" he asked carefully, recognizing the privilege of being offered insight into territories his father rarely explored in conversation. The question felt important somehow, connected to understanding not just dreams themselves, but the person who experienced them. The snow fell more heavily now, creating curtains of white that limited visibility beyond the immediate path. This enclosure felt protective rather than restrictive, wrapping them in intimate space where conversation could unfold without concern for external observation or judgment. The forest had become confessor, patient witness to exchanges that might not occur under ordinary circumstances. "Peace," Kratos answered after long consideration, the single word carrying more significance than elaborate explanation might achieve. "Dreams of quiet moments, of contentment." He paused, studying the path ahead, where morning light was beginning to penetrate more decisively through snow and branches. Dreams where nothing needs to be fought or conquered or escaped. This revelation hung between them as they continued their descent, each processing its implications from different perspectives. For Atreus, it offered hope that his father's past burdens might eventually transform into something less heavy. For Kratos, speaking the words aloud seemed to acknowledge possibilities he had barely dared to consider privately. The trail curved gently through a grove of younger pines whose branches created natural archway overhead, their needles collecting snow in patterns that resembled elaborate decorations. Here the falling flakes seemed more deliberate in their placement, arranging themselves with artistic precision rather than random accumulation. The effect created sense of walking through carefully designed space, rather than wilderness shaped purely by natural forces. Sometimes I dream about Mother, Atreus shared, his voice carrying warmth that balanced any potential sadness in the admission. Not sad dreams, though. Dreams where she's still teaching me things, showing me plants I haven't learned yet, or telling stories about places we haven't visited. He kicked at a small drift of snow that had formed beside the path. In the dreams it feels completely normal, like she never left. Kratos felt familiar tightness in his chest at mention of Faye, the complex mixture of love and loss that characterized all memories of his departed wife. Yet Atreus's description carried comfort rather than pain, suggesting that grief could transform into something more sustaining given sufficient time and proper perspective. Those are gifts, he said simply, recognizing truth in this assessment even as he spoke it. Dreams that bring her presence rather than emphasize her absence. His own dreams of Faye had begun shifting similarly over recent months, though he had not previously articulated this change, even to himself. The lightening sky above them began to show hints of color beyond simple grey, subtle touches of pink and gold that suggested dawn was approaching despite the heavy cloud cover. This gentle illumination enhanced the falling snow's beauty, each flake catching tiny amounts of colored light and reflecting it in brief moments of brilliance before continuing earthward. Their conversation settled back into comfortable silence as they navigated a steeper section of trail where careful footing required primary attention. Here the accumulated snow presented actual challenges rather than mere aesthetic beauty, concealing roots and rocks that could easily turn ankle or cause fall if approached carelessly. Kratos moved with practiced efficiency through these obstacles, his experience reading terrain serving them both as he selected the safest route downward. Occasionally, he would extend hand to steady Atreus through particularly tricky passage, though these assists were offered and accepted without comment. Natural cooperation born of mutual trust rather than formal instruction. The snow continued its steady descent throughout their careful navigation of the difficult terrain, adding constantly to accumulations that would soon make this section of trail significantly more challenging for future travelers. Yet for now it remained passable with proper attention, another reminder of timing's importance in all endeavors requiring movement through changing conditions. As they reached more level ground, the forest around them began showing signs of approaching dawn despite the heavy snow cover. Birds called occasionally from hidden perches, their voices muffled but persistent in marking territory or announcing presence to potential mates. The sounds created subtle audio landscape that complemented visual beauty of snow-laden branches and gradually brightening sky. The world feels different in snow, Atreus observed, pausing to examine a small evergreen whose branches had bent under accumulated weight until they nearly touched the ground, creating natural shelter beneath its transformed canopy. Quieter, but also more alive somehow, like everything is more itself. This observation resonated with Kratos' own perception of winter landscapes. Though he might not have expressed it in identical terms, snow had always struck him as revealer of essential character, stripping away superficial details to expose underlying structure and form. Buildings, trees, even people seemed more genuine under winter's influence, the pretense becoming impractical when survival demanded honest assessment of actual capabilities and resources. Winter demands truth, he agreed, appreciating his son's developing ability to perceive deeper patterns within apparent simplicity. It reveals what persists when comfortable illusions are no longer sustainable. His words carried weight of experience across multiple realms and circumstances, where harsh conditions had served as teachers more effective than any formal instruction. They continued through increasingly beautiful landscape as morning light grew stronger despite heavy snowfall. The combination created extraordinary visual effects, shadows and highlights shifting constantly as clouds above them moved and changed, alternately revealing and concealing the strengthening sun. Each moment brought subtly different illumination that transformed familiar terrain into something continuously new. The trail began its final descent toward the valley where their cabin waited, though they could not yet see it through snow and intervening forest. Still, both recognized landmarks that indicated proximity to home. Distinctive rock formations, particular tree arrangements, subtle changes in topography that marked transition from wilderness exploration back to domestic territory. "I'm glad we went," Atreus said as they walked through a section where their earlier tracks were still faintly visible, despite ongoing snowfall. Not just to see the deer, but all of it. The walking, the waiting, the watching. It felt important somehow. Kratos nodded understanding, recognizing his son's intuitive grasp of experiences that served multiple purposes simultaneously. The ostensible goal of observing wildlife had facilitated broader learning about patience, attention, and respectful coexistence with forces beyond human control. These lessons would prove valuable in contexts far removed from forest vigils. Important things often feel ordinary while they are happening, he offered, sharing wisdom earned through decades of only recognizing significance in retrospect. The meaning becomes clear later, through memory and reflection, rather than immediate understanding. This observation seemed to satisfy something in Atreus's developing comprehension of how learning actually occurred, not always through dramatic revelation, but often through accumulation of seemingly modest experiences that revealed larger patterns over time. The morning's expedition would likely grow in significance as weeks and months passed, its teachings integrating into broader understanding of his place within natural systems. The snow had begun to show hints of slowing as they approached more familiar territory, though it continued falling steadily enough to ensure their homecoming would occur through transformed landscape. Every tree, bush, and rock formation wore winter decoration that softened harsh edges while emphasizing essential forms. Nature's own artistic interpretation of familiar environment. Birds became more numerous as they neared areas where human habitation provided reliable food sources, their calls creating cheerful counterpoint to the muffled silence that characterized deeper forest under snow cover. Cardinals flashed red against white backgrounds, while smaller songbirds moved through branches in quick succession, each species contributing to growing sense of approaching civilization. "Do you think the deer will remember us?" Atreus asked as they walked through a meadow where their cabin's chimney smoke was finally visible in the distance. The question carried childlike wonder balanced by genuine curiosity about animal consciousness and memory, whether wild creatures retained impressions of peaceful encounters with humans. "In its own way," Kratos replied thoughtfully, considering various forms memory might take across different types of consciousness. "Perhaps not as we remember each other, but as sense of place where safety was found, where threat was absent when threat might have been expected." This answer seemed to satisfy Atreus' curiosity, while opening new avenues for contemplation about relationships between human and animal awareness. The deer would continue its existence in forest spaces they occasionally visited, their paths potentially crossing again under different circumstances where previous peaceful encounter might influence behavior in subtle but meaningful ways. The final approach to their cabin unfolded through landscapes so transformed by snow that familiar became exotic, ordinary features rendered mysterious through winter's artistic intervention. Fence posts became abstract sculptures, garden beds disappeared beneath uniform white covering, and the building itself appeared more cottage from folktale than practical wilderness dwelling. Smoke rose steadily from their chimney, evidence that banked coals had maintained modest warmth throughout their absence, as intended. This practical detail pleased Kratos, who had spent considerable effort perfecting techniques for maintaining fire during brief departures, methods that allowed adventure without returning to cold hearth and the time-consuming process of rebuilding flame from nothing. "Home looks different," Atreus commented as they approached their front door, studying how snow accumulation had altered familiar proportions and sightlines. Not worse or better, just transformed, like seeing it through someone else's eyes for the first time. This observation captured something essential about winter's impact on perception, how seasonal change could reveal aspects of familiar environment that routine observation might miss. The cabin they returned to was simultaneously the same dwelling they had left and entirely new space created through snow's intervention in standard visual relationship. As they reached their doorstep, both paused for final look back at the trail they had followed through falling snow. Their footprints created clear record of passage, though ongoing precipitation was already beginning the process of erasure that would eventually restore unmarked surface to forest floor. By evening, only the most protected sections would retain evidence of their morning journey. "Thank you," Atreus said quietly, words directed both to his father and to larger forces that had provided morning's experiences, "for showing me how to see, how to wait, how to be present with something without needing to change it or capture it or make it different than it was." Kratos felt unexpected warmth at this expression of gratitude, recognition that lessons offered had been received and understood at levels beyond mere intellectual comprehension. His son had absorbed not just information about tracking and wildlife observation, but deeper principles about respectful relationship with world beyond human control. "You learned well," he replied, the simple words carrying approval and affection rarely expressed so directly. The forest recognizes those who approach with proper respect. It shares its gifts accordingly. The snow continued falling as they finally entered their warm cabin, leaving winter's artwork to develop further outside while they attended to domestic necessities, fire tending, meal preparation, equipment maintenance. Yet the morning's experiences accompanied them indoors, influencing perspective on ordinary tasks and creating previously of continuity between wilderness encounter and daily routine. Through windows they could observe snow's ongoing transformation of their immediate environment, each hour bringing subtle changes that would accumulate into dramatically altered landscape by day's end. The falling flakes caught occasional glimpses of strengthening sunlight, creating moments of extraordinary beauty visible from comfortable interior vantage points. "I think I understand better now," Atreus said as they settled, before crackling fire with hot drinks and simple food. "Why you wanted me to see the deer without disturbing it. It wasn't really about the deer at all, was it?" Kratos considered this perceptive observation, recognizing his son's growing ability to perceive multiple layers of meaning within apparently straightforward experiences. The deer had indeed served as focal point for broader teachings about presence, patience, and respectful observation. Lessons applicable far beyond wildlife encounters. The deer was teacher, he agreed, but the real lesson was about your ability to receive what was offered without demanding more than was given. That skill serves well in all aspects of existence. Outside their windows, snow continued its gentle descent through morning light that grew stronger despite heavy cloud cover. The world beyond their cabin transformed steadily into winter wonderland, where familiar features wore new clothing and ordinary spaces achieved temporary magic through natural decoration. The warmth of their fire, the comfort of dry clothing, and the satisfaction of successful expedition combined to create perfect conditions for reflection on morning's experiences. Neither felt need for elaborate analysis or detailed discussion. The lessons had been absorbed through participation rather than explanation, integrated into understanding through direct experience rather than theoretical study. As morning progressed toward midday, snow began showing signs of gradual decrease, though enough continued falling to ensure their outdoor environment would remain transformed for days to come. This extended impact pleased them both, promised that morning's beauty would persist long enough for repeated appreciation from various perspectives and changing light conditions. "Should we go out again tomorrow?" Atreus asked, the question carrying hope for continued exploration, balanced by understanding that each wilderness encounter brought unique gifts that could not be replicated through simple repetition. "We will see what tomorrow offers," Kratos replied diplomatically, leaving possibilities open while avoiding commitment to specific plans. "Each day brings its own opportunities for learning. Our task is remaining alert to what presents itself, rather than forcing predetermined outcomes." This wisdom resonated with lessons Atreus had absorbed throughout their morning expedition: the value of patience, observation, and receptivity to unexpected gifts that revealed themselves only to those who approached with appropriate attention and respect. The deer had taught through presence rather than action. Snow had beautified through simple accumulation, and dawn had arrived through natural progression rather than human intervention. Through their cabin windows, the snow-transformed forest continued its quiet display of winter beauty, each flake adding to accumulations that would support entire ecosystems of cold-weather creatures throughout the season ahead. Birds, small mammals, and countless insects would find shelter and sustenance within snow's protective covering, reminder that apparent endings often represented beginnings from different perspectives. The morning's expedition had concluded, but its influences would persist through memory, reflection, and gradual integration into broader understanding of relationship between human consciousness and natural systems, like snow accumulating outside their windows. Experiences gathered significance through patient attention rather than forceful interpretation. As they settled into comfortable afternoon within their warm cabin, surrounded by evidence of winter's artistic transformation visible through every window, both father and son carried sense of completion, balanced by anticipation of future discoveries. The forest waited beyond their door, patient teacher ready to offer new lessons to those who approached with proper respect and attention. Atreus moved to the window facing north, where the view extended across the small meadow toward the tree line they had emerged from hours earlier. Their tracks were nearly invisible now, filled with fresh snow that created smooth, unmarked surface, broken only by occasional animal prints crossing at angles. A red squirrel had bounded through some time after their passage, its small paws leaving delicate chains of marks that spoke of urgent purpose, perhaps gathering final stores before winter's full arrival. "It's like watching the forest forget we were ever there," he observed, tracing condensation patterns on the glass with one finger. The warmth from inside created temporary fog that obscured and revealed the view in shifting patterns. Another layer of beauty added to winter's display. Not in a sad way, though. More like it's protecting our privacy somehow. Kratos joined him at the window, studying the scene with different eyes, but reaching similar conclusions. The forest's capacity for renewal never ceased to impress him. How quickly it could absorb evidence of human passage while retaining whatever beneficial changes that passage might have created. Their respectful observation of the deer would leave no physical trace, yet the deer itself would carry memory of peaceful encounter forward into future interactions with other forest dwellers. Privacy, or perhaps integration, he suggested, watching how wind patterns distributed the falling snow in subtle currents that created varying depths across the meadow. We became part of its morning story rather than intruders within it. Now our presence settles into larger pattern, like snow settling into landscape. This perspective appealed to Atreus's developing understanding of relationships between human activity and natural systems. Rather than seeing themselves as separate from or opposed to the forest environment, they could recognize their morning expedition as contribution to ongoing story that included all creatures sharing this territory. Through the window, they watched a small family of rabbits emerge from brush near the meadow's edge, their brown coats stark against accumulated white. The animals moved with cautious purpose, testing snow depth with careful steps before committing to longer hops toward whatever destination drew them across open ground. Their presence added life to the winter scene, reminder that apparent dormancy contained abundant hidden activity. They don't seem worried about the snow, Atreus noted, observing how the rabbits navigated accumulating drifts with practiced efficiency, like they know exactly how to work with it instead of fighting against it. Adaptation rather than resistance, Kratos agreed, recognizing principle applicable far beyond winter survival. Throughout his long existence, he had learned that circumstances demanding fundamental change required flexibility rather than rigid insistence on familiar approaches. The wisdom showed itself as clearly in rabbit behavior as in cosmic conflicts between gods and titans. The afternoon light continued its subtle transformation, filtering through snow-laden clouds in ways that created constantly shifting illumination across the landscape beyond their windows. Sometimes the falling flakes caught direct sunlight and sparkled like scattered diamonds. Other moments they appeared silver against darker backgrounds, occasionally achieving perfect transparency that made them nearly invisible except for their movement through air. Mimir's voice came from his resting place near the fireplace, where he had been unusually quiet during their window observations. Quite remarkable how snow transforms temporal perception, he commented with scholarly insight. Minutes stretch into longer periods when watching falling flakes, while hours compress when attention focuses on accumulating patterns rather than individual moments. This observation resonated with both Kratos and Atreus, who had indeed experienced time differently during their morning expedition and continued afternoon contemplation. The deer vigil had seemed to last simultaneously forever and no time at all. Perfect example of how focused attention could alter subjective experience of duration and sequence. Maybe that's part of why winter feels magical, Atreus suggested, still watching rabbits make their careful progress across the meadow, not just because of how it looks, but because of how it changes the way we experience being alive in each moment. Kratos considered this insight with growing appreciation for his son's philosophical development. The boy consistently demonstrated ability to perceive patterns and connections that extended beyond immediate surface observations, developing wisdom that would serve him well regardless of whatever challenges future might present. Time becomes less important than presence, he agreed, articulating understanding that had developed through years of painful learning. When attention focuses completely on current experience, past regrets and future anxieties hold less power over consciousness. The rabbits completed their meadow crossing and disappeared into brush on the far side, leaving fresh tracks that would soon join the accumulating historical record preserved in snow. Each creature passing through would add its story to winter's archive, creating layered narrative, readable by those who understood the language of prints and pathways. As afternoon progressed toward evening, the snowfall began showing signs of gradual reduction, though enough continued descending to ensure their transformed environment would persist well into the next day. This extended duration pleased them both, promised that morning's beauty would remain available for repeated appreciation from various perspectives and changing light conditions. The fire in their hearth settled into steady, comfortable rhythm that filled the cabin with gentle warmth and the subtle sounds of burning wood. Occasional pops and hisses created audio punctuation for their quiet afternoon, while the steady crackle provided constant background that enhanced rather than interrupted their peaceful contemplation. Atreus returned to his seat near the fire, pulling a well-worn book from beside his chair, collection of Norse tales his mother had left behind, stories that grew more meaningful with each reading as his understanding of the world deepened through experience. The afternoon's peaceful atmosphere seemed perfect for revisiting familiar narratives with fresh perspective gained through morning's lessons. "Would you like me to read aloud?" he asked, recognizing that shared stories often enhanced solitary reflection. "There's one here about a winter that lasted 3 years, and how different creatures found ways to help each other survive when normal resources became unavailable." Kratos nodded acceptance, settling back in his own chair with rare relaxation that afternoon's calm had facilitated. Listening to stories read in his son's clear voice had become one of life's simple pleasures, moments when past trauma and future concerns receded before immediate experience of connection and contentment. As Atreus began reading, his voice took on the rhythmic cadence that made stories come alive for listeners. The tale unfolded through their warm cabin, while snow continued its gentle descent outside, creating perfect harmony between narrative content and environmental atmosphere. The story's themes of cooperation and adaptation resonated with observations they had made throughout their day together. In the second year of the endless winter, Atreus read, "The wise bear taught the frightened rabbits how to find shelter beneath the great pine's roots, while the clever fox showed the exhausted deer where ice had formed bridges across streams they could no longer ford. Each creature offered what it knew best, and all survived what none could have endured alone." The parallels to their morning experience were not lost on either listener or reader. They too had learned from wild creatures. The deer teaching patience through example, the forest itself demonstrating integration and acceptance through its response to snow. Like the tale's characters, they had found wisdom through respectful observation rather than forceful intervention. Outside their windows, the short winter day began its transition toward evening, though heavy cloud cover made this change more subtle than usual. The quality of light shifted gradually from bright silver to softer grey, while the falling snow seemed to glow with internal luminescence that made each flake visible against darkening background. The endless winter finally broke, Atreus concluded, not because any single creature defeated it, but because all had learned to see it as teacher rather than enemy. Spring returned to find them stronger, wiser, and more connected than they had been before the long cold began. The story's conclusion hung in the air between them like incense, its meaning settling into consciousness through repetition and reflection rather than immediate analysis. Like their morning's deer encounter, the tale's power lay not in dramatic revelation, but in gentle recognition of truths that felt both surprising and inevitable once perceived. "Your mother chose her stories well," Kratos observed, recognizing Faye's wisdom in preserving narratives that would serve multiple purposes as Atreus matured. Each reading reveals new layers that match the reader's developing understanding, This assessment pleased Atreus, who had indeed discovered that familiar stories evolved with his own growth, offering different insights each time he returned to them. The book beside his chair contained dozens of such tales, each waiting to provide whatever guidance or comfort future circumstances might require. The afternoon's peaceful rhythm continued as daylight faded, and their cabin's interior grew more intimate in firelight. Snow still fell beyond their windows, though more gently now, individual flakes large enough to track with eyes as they spiraled downward through air that seemed to cradle each crystal's unique journey toward Earth. "I think I'll remember this day differently than other days," Atreus said quietly, watching flames dance across burning logs in their fireplace. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because everything felt so complete somehow. Like all the pieces fit together perfectly without anyone trying to make them fit. Kratos understood this observation completely, recognizing in it description of experiences that had become more frequent since Faye's death had begun transforming their relationship from teacher-student towards something approaching partnership. Days when conflict seemed unnecessary, when presence itself provided sufficient purpose, when simply being alive in each moment felt like enough. Such days are rare gifts, he acknowledged, speaking from decades of experience that had taught him to recognize and appreciate peaceful interludes between periods of necessary struggle. They remind us what we fight to protect when fighting becomes necessary. The wisdom in this observation settled between them like another layer of comfort. Understanding that today's peace gained meaning not just through its own inherent value, but through contrast with challenges that had preceded it and others that might lie ahead. Peace appreciated required memory of conflict transcended. As evening deepened around their warm cabin, the snow continued its patient work of transformation, adding constantly to accumulations that would reshape their familiar landscape for weeks to come. Each flake joined countless others in creating something larger than individual contribution, collective beauty that emerged from simple cooperation rather than complex planning. Through their windows, the last light of day filtered through falling snow in ways that created extraordinary visual effects. Backlighting that made each flake appear luminous, side lighting that emphasized texture and movement, occasional breaks in cloud cover that sent shafts of golden light across white-covered meadow, like natural spotlights highlighting winter's artistry. "It's getting beautiful in a completely different way," Atreus observed, noting how evening light transformed the same scene they had watched throughout afternoon. Like the snow is performing different dances depending on what kind of light reveals them. This perception captured something essential about winter's aesthetic appeal, how changing conditions created constant variety within apparent uniformity. Infinite subtle variations that rewarded patient observation with ever-renewing discoveries. No two moments of snowfall appeared identical when viewed with sufficient attention to detail. The fire in their hearth had settled into glowing beds of coals that radiated steady warmth while requiring minimal attention. Perfect companion for evening's contemplative mood. Occasional flames still danced across the embers when air currents provided fresh oxygen, but mostly the heat source had achieved sustainable equilibrium that would maintain comfort through the night ahead. "Tomorrow we'll wake to a different world," Atreus said, anticipating morning's revelation of Snow's completed overnight work. The same places, but transformed, like seeing familiar friends wearing new clothes that show aspects of their character we hadn't noticed before. Kratos smiled slightly at this imaginative comparison, appreciating his son's gift for finding analogies that illuminated experiences in unexpected ways. The boy's developing poetic sensibility balanced practical skills with aesthetic appreciation, combination that would serve him well, regardless of whatever path his future might take. And we will be slightly different as well, he added, recognizing that meaningful experiences changed those who received them, even when changes remained subtle rather than dramatic. Today's lessons will influence tomorrow's perceptions, creating ongoing dialogue between memory and fresh observation. This understanding pleased Atreus, who had begun recognizing how each day's experiences layered upon previous ones to create gradually deepening comprehension of life's complex patterns. Like snow accumulating outside their windows, wisdom gathered through patient attention rather than forceful acquisition. As full darkness settled across the winter landscape, their cabin became island of warmth and light, surrounded by transformed territory that sparkled faintly in starlight whenever clouds briefly parted. The snow had slowed to occasional flakes now, though enough continued falling to ensure morning would reveal further changes to their snow-sculpted environment. Snow continued falling through strengthening daylight, each flake a small miracle of natural engineering, completing journeys begun in clouds high above. Their gentle descent created visual poetry that required no interpretation, beauty sufficient unto itself, asking nothing more than appreciative witness to its brief existence before joining accumulations that would nourish Earth through winter's long sleep. Outside their cabin, the world wore white clothing that transformed familiar into magical, ordinary into extraordinary. Inside, warmth and comfort provided perfect conditions for gratitude, reflection, and quiet anticipation of whatever gifts tomorrow might bring to those wise enough to receive them with open hearts and patient attention. And so our journey through the realms draws to a close for tonight. May Hypnos, god of sleep, watch over you as you drift through dreams of legendary proportions. If these tales of gods and monsters helped guide you to restful sleep, consider supporting our journey by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support gives me the strength to continue sharing these stories night after night. Remember, these videos play uninterrupted through the night, with no ads to disturb your slumber, just the soothing sounds of mythic realms to accompany your dreams. For those seeking passage to exclusive content, our Patreon offers early access to all videos and special playlists crafted to enhance your sleep. The link awaits in the description below. Until our next journey together, may your sleep be deep, your dreams be mighty, and your rest be undisturbed by the conflicts of gods and men. Sleep well, brave one.